So a few interesting things, I think, when we get into aggregate demand and aggregate supply. Um, we started off the term talking about just demand and supply. We had our I'd say we have price up here, right, and our quantity down on the x-axis. Let's just say we're talking about I don't know, cereal, like a box of cereal. So let's just go cereal. And, obviously, if the price of cereal is here, this is just one box of cereal out of millions of goods that are sold in the economy. Here is our equilibrium, and if the price of cereal goes up, I used this example in class earlier today, where I said, let's say there's, let's see, Cheerios. Well, just call it Apple Jacks and Fruit Loops. And let's just assume, an economist's favorite word is assume. Let's just assume that these are substitutes. This is the demand for Apple Jacks right here. If the price for whatever number of factors that we've studied previously increases, the quantity demanded for Apple Jacks will decrease this direction, which is a movement along the demand curve. Now, if the price of Apple Jacks increases, what would happen to the demand of Fruit Loops? The price of Fruit Loops didn't really increase, but the demand would have, because we have again assumed that Fruit Loops are a substitute for Apple Jacks. So if Apple Jacks price went up here, then we could expect, as a substitute, Fruit Loops being a substitute, that the demand for Fruit Loops would shift this way. So I guess in terms of, kind of mix the two together here in this graph, in terms of the demand curve, that would be Fruit Loops, and the price movement along would be the price hike of Apple Jacks. So this is just one particular good at its price with substitutes, talking about movements along the demand curve and a shift in the demand curve itself and what causes both of those respectively. So that's just a quick recap of the basic founding, the building blocks, the foundation of understanding how supply, demand, and equilibrium work together. So with that, let's jump into a much bigger sphere, very much a macro sphere, 30,000-foot view, bird's eye view of what aggregate demand means, and then later aggregate supply as well. So we move from the demand for one particular good to aggregate demand. What does aggregate really mean? Pretty much on the whole, on the aggregate, everything considered. It's not just one good. It's not just, Fruit Loops versus Apple Jacks. It's just not cereal. This is aggregate demand is this curve is going to resemble the macroeconomy as a whole. We don't have quantity down here anymore. That's not the case. That would be the case if we were looking at one specific good. What we are looking at, though, is the economy as a whole. All goods, whether it's tires, sneakers, shirts, cereal, light bulbs, computers, whatever you want to say. It's all of it together on the aggregate. And over a given period of time, when we look at the x-axis in the aggregate demand curve, which as you can see is right here, we're looking at basically all of an economy's output. All of the economy's output. So we can label this x-axis instead of Q for quantity. We're going to go ahead and label it output, or Y. And it's also been known interchangeably that this axis can also be called, real GDP, because we are looking at the output of an economy as a whole. Like I said, tires, sneakers, shirts, cereal, whatever, all of the goods and services produced in an economy at a given period of time. You put all that together, you don't have just one a product, like a box of Apple Jacks, you have the entire economy. And when you add all that up together, Y equals C plus I plus G plus NX, you are going to, on the expenditure side, you're going to come up with real GDP. So the x-axis, when it looks to the aggregate model, is real GDP. So with that said, well, let me just write that in. The x-axis is going to represent real GDP. Good. Or, real GDP is obviously real output. And it can be used interchangeably. So what about the y-axis? The y-axis. Well, in our singular good or singular service example of supply and demand, we had quantity and price, just like how we started off with. But with considering all goods in an economy, all of output at any given time, we can't just have one price. We have to have the aggregate price level, and that's really essentially the answer is the aggregate, that's aggregate, AGG, price level. Now you may see this graph sometimes look at, it would be aggregate price level to where you have, we'll just call this price level, or PL, where you have numbers like 350, 300, maybe 250, 200, 150, so on and so forth. Those are the price levels. However, those can be used interchangeably, much like how output and real GDP looks down here. The y-axis can be be used interchangeably as well. Sometimes you'll see it as the price level, the aggregate price level in the economy, or you'll see it as the percent change of the price level, the aggregate price level. And what is the percent change of the aggregate price level? It's inflation. Inflation. So on the y-axis, you may see the inflation rate in percentage terms, or you may see the actual indexed price level. But either way, both are going to give you the same type of information. You're going to see what the price level is doing in the economy and how that affects spending. So prices and spending, and what happens when spending goes up or down, it affects directly right here, output, real GDP, the expenditure side. If we spend less, then output will go down. Or, we can also say, or real GDP. And the opposite's true. If we spend more, then output would increase in terms of aggregate demand. So that's just a quick differentiation between what we started talking about the first few weeks of school in terms of supply and demand, and now what we're looking at here. This is the whole point. Talking about movements along the curve, shifts in the demand curve, the supply curve, that's all fine and well. It's important. And talking about singular goods or services, substitutes, complements, why a curve would shift or why not. Again, talking about singular goods like Cheerio or Apple Jacks or Fruit Loops or whatever on one particular good to illustrate that, all fine and well. But this is why we did all that to begin with. We are now looking at aggregate demand, and eventually we'll look at aggregate supplies, because we are now studying the economy as a whole. It is this model that allows us to understand how inflation or price levels are going to affect output, or how interest rates, or which would be an indirect of monetary policy, would affect the economy as a whole, the aggregate economy, right? Aggregate demand, aggregate supply, aggregate economy. We're going to look at how government spending or taxation can affect this model of aggregate output. So I'll go ahead and stop this video for now, just to give this is the background of what aggregate demand is. We'll get into the particulars. There won't be too much comparing and contrasting with the old price quantity model that we started off with. That was just to give you the building blocks for where we are at right now, and that is the aggregate economy. So hopefully that refresher makes a little sense. And transitioning over to the economy as a whole, hopefully that gives you a little bit of a better understanding of what we're going to be discussing going forward. So if you have any questions, shoot me an email or drop a note in the comment box. I'll be happy to get back to you. Otherwise, I will catch you in the next video. Thanks for watching.